Asante sana, Adrian. Edie, thank you for those scene-setting remarks, and thank you for organizing today's webinar so efficiently. Allow me to kick off with our acknowledgements. First of all, we acknowledge the physical absence of the East African community, but we are happy that Deputy Secretary General, Madam Annette Semwanga, considered attending, as she is a very keen supporter of all private sector activities. So we know she is here in spirit, and the ESC is well represented in one form or another. Our EABC board members present today, members of the East African Business Council and private sector representatives from all our partner states, the East African Business Council Chief Executive Officer and your team, our colleagues from PwC, and panelists today, ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. On behalf of the East African Business Council Board, I thank you all for dedicating time to participate in this important webinar. It's a pre-budget webinar on proposed taxes and fiscal measures for 2025-2026. And in the same spirit, I'm privileged to deliver this afternoon the appreciation of the private sector across the whole of East Africa to PwC for partnering with the East African Business Council to organize this important discussion as we prepare to receive from our governments their national budgets in a couple of weeks' time. First of all, we should all be proud that we have collaborated annually between the East African Business Council and PwC to make this pre-budget webinar a calendar event. And we need to give these two organizations a round of applause, either through technology or where you are. Because to maintain this consistency year on year, ahead of the governments themselves reading their national budgets, is extremely important in helping our private sector understand what the new tax proposals mean across the region, not just in the individual partner states, but also to advise all the members of the private sector on what business decisions to make for the good of their businesses and economic growth across the region. And ladies and gentlemen, this is why we are here, for economic growth across the region, but economic growth that is driven by private sector activity. And we trust that even as we discuss here as members of the private sector, our partners in economic development, the public sector, the governments, are also going to benefit from these discussions because they will get to hear from us, the people, the organizations that drive the economies, what they need to do when setting policy. And they get to understand that they're doing it not for the good of business alone, but for the good of the people of East Africa. As you're all aware, these budgets, the national budgets are going to be read in 2 weeks, and this has become customary as per the pre-budget consultations of the finance ministers across the region, and as per the agreement within the EAC treaty that all these partner states signed. The expectations of the private sector across East Africa and across the community are that these new tax measures that are going to be introduced will consider all the recommendations that we put before our governments in the build-up to the day of the budget reading. And our recommendations, our suggestions that we presented to the governments were aimed at building the national economy, but with a view to building the regional economy. And I must applaud the different members of the private sector in all the partner states that ensured that even while considering the national interest in setting fiscal policy, we reminded the governments at all points to look at the regional economy. This was regardless of all the different negative impacts that we have seen coming our way as East Africans and the rest of the world has seen, whether it's trade policy shifts with partners such as the US, the ending of the Africa Growth and Opportunity Act, and many other different moves that have affected us. We've stayed true to the course and said we need to focus on growth of business within East Africa. Thinking positively, the new tax measures should make the business environment in our community, our East African community, more conducive for a private sector activity to thrive. And at this point, we must reflect that today we're in a very different position from where we were 15 years ago. The feeling that we would have at this time, as we head into budget reading days, was more or less ominous. We went into this day with a sense of gloom, a sense of worry. But today it's different because we know We have had engagements with the government, and we are more or less sure about what they are going to say and why they are going to come out with these proposals. Ladies and gentlemen, that is proof that the aspirations of the East African community are being met in some great measure, and we should not take it for granted. The discussion that we are going to have this afternoon on its own also needs more applause, because this webinar is going to focus on these domestic tax proposals that are looking at the different heads like excise duty, income tax, value added tax. But we're going to look at them considering the disparity of the different tax regimes within the partner states, but to bring them all together with an East African eye. Under the East African community integration, partner states have still retained their mandate for domestic taxes because it is understandable. The sovereignty of each partner state is important. There are different national aspirations, but the purpose of trying to bring it all under this one East African umbrella is to create that harmonization that will make the East African Common Market and East African Customs Union a reality, and a reality that builds, that grows business activity within this region and makes us more competitive, both as a single investment destination, a common market, and also as an engine for further growth into the rest of Africa, because we have a big market to command. And all East Africans here are aware that that market can be ours for the taking if we focus our public sector to doing the right things that will encourage the private sector to activate the engine into the places that we know we need to be. Ladies and gentlemen, the freedom of developing and managing domestic taxes, it has embedded these disparities to some level within the different partner states. We see unfair competition in some places. We see unequal treatment of taxpayers in other places. But overall, not all hope is lost. We know that the governments are aware that intra-ESC trade and investment is hampered when the wrong things are done or when the right things are not done. And we know that this gives us a continuing opportunity to engage as the private sector, the ones who are actually doing business, in order to bring these aspirations back on course. And we do so through the different bodies of the East African community, who then guide the national governments to remember that they have a duty to make this aspiration a reality. The East African Customs Union Protocol is going to unlock, if it is taken as seriously as we believed it would be 25 years ago, more than 25 years ago, is going to unlock the rest of Africa and therefore the rest of the globe for all the business activities that East Africans want to do. And that is why, ladies and gentlemen, we invite you at every turn and opportunity to join the East African Business Council in urging these partner states to fast track the harmonization of domestic taxes within each state, but also to eliminate all discriminatory fiscal practices, because these do not align with the principles of the customs union or the common market protocols, and certainly do not help us as East Africa take the rightful position that we should have on this continent of Africa and in the world. We should all make it clear that the beneficiaries will not be the private sector alone, but the public sector that feeds off our taxes to meet the socioeconomic needs of all East Africans. And I'm happy that the team that we've put together this afternoon to lead these discussions and to guide them is a team composed of, I think, our topmost experts across the region from PwC, who are going to delve into the insights of these proposed tax measures and allow us, as members of the private sector, to critically evaluate how these measures will impact our businesses, but also the economies in general. And I once again urge you, all attendants here today and all members of the private sector, to remain united and keep pushing these partner states to harmonize domestic taxes so that we encourage the movement of goods and services across this region, optimal allocation of resources, and therefore take up the rightful spot when we move into the Africa Free Continental Trade Area and beyond. Mabina Mabwana, I urge participants to take this opportunity to share all knowledge you have of our competent tax experts here today from PwC. I trust that this webinar is going to be successful. I urge you again to continue with the advocacy for harmonization to make this region a single investment destination, one common market with one people achieving prosperity and development together, pamoja. With these few remarks, I declare our webinar officially open. Nashukuru sana.